All right, welcome to episode 12 of the Discovery Files. Today we're going to interview John Marma. So we're switching to a new ore deposit today. And so we're actually going to go all the way across the world to Nevada and we're going to hear about the Midas deposits. So, John, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, yeah. Thanks for having me on. First of all, Scott, appreciate the opportunity to talk about Midas. Maybe I start kind of from the beginning or before my beginning, if you will. Again, I am a geologist, but it was kind of in my blood, in my genes, if you will. My great grandfather was a gold miner up in Nome, Alaska, in the early part of the 19th century. My grandfather came along. They were up there for decades. They had a very big, large lode claim out of Esther Creek, which is just south of Fairbanks. They actually operated on one of the primary dredges in the area. So that was up into the, I want to say that into the late 30s, 1930s, that my grandfather was there. It's actually the same time that my grandfather and grandmother met via pen pals. At that time, Alaska was not a state, and the only way that you could get to Alaska was being affiliated with the military. Well, it just so happened that my great grandfather was actually in the military as well and managed to get my grandmother on a cargo flight up there in 1938, I think it was. After being pen pals for years, she flew up to Fairbanks. They hung out and they got married, and they were up there for about a year. And interestingly, they drove back down. This would have been now the early 1940s to get her belongings from where she resided in Illinois, and en route to get back to Alaska, they needed some additional funds. Well, again, my grandfather had the expertise of being a dredge operator. So they took the path via Nevada on the way back to Alaska to earn some money, where my grandfather actually was a dredge operator at the Manhattan mine site in southern Nevada outside of Tonopah.
I have walked over those dredge piles before. That's incredible.
Yeah. And my grandfather was running the dredge. I got really cool pictures of him operating the dredge. So, anyways,
Wow.
long story short is they were there for a year or two, and it didn't make sense to continue on to Alaska, and they actually went back to Illinois. And then my mother came along, and then I eventually came along, and so geology and rocks and the interest in earth sciences was just, again, in my genes, if you will. And so from an early age, we did a lot of rock hunting. A lot of our family vacations revolved around rock hunting. We would go to the Lake Superior shores looking for Lake Superior agates. We'd go to Lake Michigan looking for Petoskey stones, I think is how you say it. It's been a few years since I've said that word. Um, we were a part of an earth science club. It was called the Stony Earth Science Club of Northern Illinois. That was probably a really impactful thing. So I was regularly going to meetings as a elementary and middle school kid, learning about different aspects of geology, and then doing field trips. Just thought it was cool as could be. I was like, man, people get paid to do this stuff. So it was kind of natural going into the earth sciences to into geology. But what was interesting, my dad was an electrical engineer, so I thought I might want to go the more the engineering route. And so my initial declared major was a petroleum engineer, where I went to school at North Dakota State. And after the first semester, I was informed by my advisor I was the only person that was enrolled in that program at the time, and so they had to get rid of the program. And so again, it was a logical path. Well, if I'm not staying on the engineering side, let's jump to the geology side. And that's really where it took its root and foundation, where I grew my education from NDSU. After a bachelor's degree, I actually went overseas. I studied in Austria on a Fulbright scholarship. I was studying
Oh.
Argentinian rocks in Austria, layered mafic intrusions. That was pretty cool. And then came back to the States after that was over, and completed a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I continued looking at layered mafic intrusions. I was looking at the Duluth complex and
Yeah.
looking at the distribution of the metals, and trying to understand why they were where they were at, if you will. So roundabout way as to how I became a geologist, it's been a great journey.
I think all of those the backstory of how people get to where they're at, it's so formative in how they view the world and how they view the rocks that they see after that. And it's often the thing that we just totally ignore in geology. So it's always I don't know, I think it's really interesting to hear just how varied backgrounds can be.
For sure.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of geologists in the industry, and sometimes it's kind of a fluke. Like, hey, I was in school and I just took a geology class.
Yeah.
For me, it was something that was just kind of quite natural.
No, that's great. So so how'd you end up at Midas? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so great question. Started looking for work in after my master's there. I actually started a PhD program. I spent 2 summers in South Africa looking at orogenic systems in the Barberton district. Things just weren't going well. Funding wasn't really coming together for a project, and so kind of the writing was on the wall that it was time to move on, which was totally fine. So I started looking for work. My problem and my challenge was gold was sitting at like 250, $300 an ounce. And
Yeah, this is like 97, 98, somewhere in there.
that would have been, no, that was, no, that was 2002,
Okay,
2003.
yeah.
But what was crazy though is again, yeah, I had my professor, Phil Brown, my advisor, he was an economic geologist. There were other advisors in the department that, um, quite frankly, thought I was stupid for going into mineral exploration. They're like, "Look at like, why would you go into an industry that's, you know,
Yeah.
250 $300 ounce gold?" I'm like, "What I want to do. I don't know. I'm
I
interested in
had
it. Sorry."
it's a very similar experience as well because like I started junior college in 2001 and gold was worth nothing, right? And then in 2003 I transferred to UNR and I had the same thing where I was like I enrolled in the economic geology program and then they canned it because I was the only person in it. And so I remember taking a class where it was Tommy Thompson was teaching this class and he was this phenomenal professor and it was me and a master's student taking this class on exploration geology. And I was like, this is the best class I've ever taken, and I couldn't convince anybody else to join it. And the school tried to cancel it, and he's like, you know, look, if you cancel this, I'm resigning because this needs to be taught. And
Yeah, yeah.
so it was
So
wild time.
definitely. So one of the big life lessons that I learned right out of that time, because we were in a downswing with the metals industry, was the importance of networking. Email was in its infancy, so really you were still, pushing buttons and calling people. And I probably cold called 100 or 150 people. I mean, if I could find a phone number, I called it.
Yeah, yeah.
And as a student, I was very appreciative to talk to people, and they would give me advice. Lots of them said, "Why are you going into the minerals industry?" Which was interesting. But I really appreciated those that gave additional guidance. And one person that was very important in my connection with Nevada was John Muntean. At the time, John was still working for Placer Dome, and what he did was he just talked with me, and
Mm,
we talked about the industry, what some of the expectations were, that things, it's in the down cycle right now, and things are really tough. No one's hiring. But what he did is he goes, "I'm just going to pass you on to another person that maybe might be able to say something." So he passed me on to Pam Zolar, and again had a really good conversation. She didn't have any jobs, but then got passed on to another name, which happened to be Rick Strife. Rick
oh
was
yeah,
the chief geologist at Midas at the time. I think about it, I hadn't talked to Rick at that point. I got passed off to Jeff Chamberlain, who was down in Arizona.
yeah.
That's what it was, and because that's part of the funny story is, so Jeff's like, "Yeah, we should meet up. I can't say that I've got a job for you, but we should certainly meet up. Why don't you come up to PDAC and we'll meet?" So PDAC's in March, and so I went up. I think this would have been 2004 now, and went to the booth looking for this just Jeff Chambers guy. He had taken lunch, and the Newmont booths are full of people. And the guy that I was talking to said, "Well, why don't you talk to this guy?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll talk to that guy." And the guy came over and he introduced himself. He says, "Hi, my name is Steve Enders. I'm the vice president of exploration for Newmont." I was just like, "Cool," you know?
It's a good person to talk to.
Yeah. So we went to lunch, and again, Steve, one of these gentlemen that um, not only is willing to talk, but just is willing to relate. And he's uh, heavily involved with the school, Colorado School of Mines. That skill set was just there, where he would relate to students or people. I guess I don't know how you entry level people.
Yeah.
Anyways, had lunch. It was a really good conversation. And at the end, he's just like, "You know what? I think we could probably find something for you." And he started just calling around for me after that meeting. Again, long story short, I was introduced, and they said, "You have two opportunities. You can work on the western part of the state or the eastern part of the state." And being right out of school for Newmont, that meant nothing to me.
Yeah.
So I flew to Elko and I drove over to Winnemucca. that's when I met Rick Strife. He took me out to Midas and introduced me to Midas, which I thought was the coolest thing. And then the next day, I think I drove over and was on the Carlin Trend, met with Mike Nemitz and that group. And at the end of the day, I kind of was given a bit of a choice as did I have a preference of which wanted to work on? And for me, I was just like, no brainer. I'm working in epithermal veins. It's visual, it's in your face, it's high grade. Again, being a little bit naive of what all of that meant. I'm really glad I didn't do that because it was a blast.
Yeah. It's such amazing geology there. I remember going, like, on an interview there, I think it was 2006, and just, like, the textures and the veins and, like, like, the mine crews were great. It was a different time, right? So they're still doing, like, jacklegging and everything,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it was just such a cool mine, right? It's a really interesting place.
Yep. And one of the things that always fascinated me about economic geology and why I wanted to go into it is you're a jack of all trades, master of none. And when I was studying geology, I liked all the different subjects. I liked the geochemistry, I liked the geophysics, I liked the structure, the mineralogy. So an economic geologist really tied all that together. And I liked the ability of being in a mine where it was kind of a playground. I could chase whatever I found interesting. Structural geology did happen to be my favorite course. And so I gravitated towards understanding the structure of Midas, which in an epithermal system, of course, structure's king.
Mm,
It was a lot of fun. No one had really thought of the really big picture. About the same time I had joined, Dave Reese had come through and done a study. That was very informative. Dave's a great structural geologist. In fact, I was the one that led him around underground on some of his tours and got to know him and learned a lot just in the few days that I spent with him. But again, um, taking those learnings and then applying it to not only the deposit, but then expounding on it and coming up with the hypotheses and then having the ability to test those hypotheses with the use of the drill bit through exploration and everything. So for me, I was at Midas about 15 years. About 5 of those years were in the production setting, which was really beneficial because I learned the bellies of the beast. I understood what made an epithermal system. I understood how the veins pinched and swelled, how they would jump around, how the grade, even though the vein might be well developed, the grade might not be there, and the grade would come back. Just really got a good feel for the nuances of the mineralization, which I think helped make me a lot more effective when it came to the exploration within the district. Say I drill a hole and not get what I really wanted to see. I knew what kind of encouragement I wanted to see to suggest that my hypothesis still might be good, but I needed to stay on it and chase it.
yeah. It's like, "Oh, okay, this is kind of what it tends to look like between the ore shoots underground, and so maybe if we drill along, strike here," or something like, yeah. You have all these senses of what it looks like when you're close to the ore, because often you're parking your tractor just outside of the ore zone and walking in, right?
Yeah, for
So
sure, for sure.
was it a big change for you to go from the production environment to exploration? Like, how was that like?
That's a good, yeah. So for me, it was a pretty easy transition. It was production kind of into more of the, again, brownfields, near mine exploration, the Newmont's terms at this time of who fit into what bucket. It was kind of a gray area at the time. Randy Vance was there, and one of the frustrations that we had was when the mine was discovered, it was really designed to be put into production and mine basically what was there. It was not developed with the foresight of, hey, there could be more. Hey, let's set the workings, the infrastructure up where you could further test the district or near mine. And so some of the limitations that we have, we're always finding drill bays to drill from, um, be it just main haulage, and they just never wanted to close the main haulage down for production purposes. They never wanted to close it down to put in a muck bay, or to the extent, what was really interesting about Midas is all the utilities in the entire mine came down the main heading for the most part, down the main haulage, and they were all hung on the left rib. So that basically, I'm not going to say sterilized, but it made it very difficult to do any exploration to the west of the mine because not only are they not going to build a muck bay for you to drill in, they're not going to break all the utilities and power and water and air. They're not going to do that to put in a muck bay for a measly geo to do some exploration drilling.
Yeah.
And so there was some hurdles like that that we needed to overcome, but I would say our track record of having success helped us get through those hurdles, and at some point, we did have the ability to get muck bays, uh, established past those utilities, knowing that it was gonna have an impact on production, but they recognized that, hey, we were onto stuff, understanding where the mineralization was located and stuff.
Yeah, you start building reputation and people start taking risks on you, right? And it's like, because if you're brand new to the mine and you're trying to convince a mine manager that they need to shut down production for 3 days, that's just not going to happen, right? But if you've shown like a track record, they'll take a bit more of a risk on you, right? So and say, okay, well maybe we can time that with a mill down or something like that, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And for me, one of the things that really helped my credibility, I wrote a paper, 2010 GSN, on cymoid loops, and basically a cymoid loop, right, is a structural expression of how the veins pinch and swell, or how the rock will rupture. You'll actually get multiple in echelon vein segments. So while the veins might not be pointing in the same direction, the overall trend pointing in a general direction. So the understanding these cymoid loops, and writing this paper, which was all a result of all the production work I had done, I had some really big wins there. So as an example, so I understood the architecture of these cymoid loops, and we'd walk down these headings, and these guys are dropping stopes, and they're like, "We are not getting the recovery. Why are we not getting the recovery in these stopes?" Well, I'd go into these headings and be like, "Well, you mined the wrong side of the cymoid. The high grade vein is 10 feet, 20 feet into the rib, and here I can show you." And so I would map this stuff out and demonstrate. And so there were several times where, I mean, some of the little, call them hobby projects of developing the cymoid loops, they would generate, $5 million dollars worth of revenue. So that it was not insignificant. And so enough of
Yeah.
those built up, they're like, hey, this guy in this cymoid theory actually, he might know what he's talking about.
I think that's the big challenge with a lot of geology theories are hard to test and they can be years in the making, and things like that that you learn in the production environment, they're often things you can test in a month or in even a week. And so it's a very different experience, right? When you're starting to say, okay, if you drill, like do 2 rounds that way, and then we'll probably hit the vein on the third round, and then you get a lot more credibility. So,
Well, for sure. And then they're like, how did you do that?
with magic.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
so so yeah, again, it was for the exploration that we did. It took a lot of, again, street credibility to build that, and then from there, the other big obvious thing was, again, because the mine had never been set up for exploration from underground. Not that it was a new concept, but introducing, hey, really, when you're in an epithermal vein system, you're drilling these near vertical targets. The optimal location to be drilling these things, or the optimal way to be drilling a bonanza horizon system, is to be drilling perpendicular to the vein structures, where from the surface it's not optimal. You can test targets, but from underground, if you get at the boiling horizon, you can test as far as the drill rig can reach. You could test for additional veins, and none of that had ever happened at Midas when
Oh,
we've gotten
wow. What a cool opportunity.
it, totally. And so again, the cymoid model is fractal in nature. So in reality, you could just take this and scale it out at every scale, and recognizing that, okay, the scale that we're mining, there really should be a whole nother set of veins to the east, and they're within 1,500 feet. Let's drill some holes and see if they're there. And then again, there had been some drilling in the hanging wall, and there were some sniffs of geochemistry, like high grade, higher arsenic, higher selenium, but not necessarily developed veins or whatever. But they weren't necessarily at the boiling horizon, one, or two, knowing that these things pinch and swell, you need to drill a series of holes just so you get on the right, like, periodicity to maybe hit an ore shoot.
Yeah.
So in 2009, we kind of systematically worked through the eastern side of the mine, and we hit, I think, on the order of 5 or 6 veins, and it was off and running. And that added like another 5 or 6 years of mine life. It was
Wow.
quite significant. Yeah.
And what a feeling at that time, right? Where it's like that first one you hit, because that was a lot of years from the initial discovery of the mine, right? That was That's 15 years, 20 years since the initial
Yeah,
discovery, right?
yeah,
And so
they're both.
so you think about that, that's a long dry spell where they hadn't really found, like, they continued to develop the veins and explore the ones they were on, but they hadn't found any new veins for decades, right? So,
Yeah, that's right. And a little bit of serendipity did fall into luck, call it, if you will. Again, we had this model. Hey, we should hit this structure at this distance. And this was in particular to the GP vein. Interesting. So we hit many veins, but GP was one of them. And what was funny about it is, again, we predicted it at a certain distance. I don't remember what the distance was, 800 feet, call it. And so we had a drill services person, Glenn Peterson, helping with the drill program, and he was there through the night shift. And instead of waking up the geologist in the middle of the night, hey, we got to TD. You want us to keep going or not? Glenn, instead of calling us and waking us up in the night, he said, just drill through the night and we'll TD in the morning. And sure enough, because of that decision, the GP vein, the Glenn Peterson vein, is because he decided to let the rig run through the night. And it was in that next 50 feet that we hit the vein. And it was stupid high grade, so it was good.
well, and it's so easy because, like, I've been the geo on call, where you get a call at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you're looking at core photos. I don't really see any alteration, and so I often wonder about that. How many times, when you're bleary eyed trying to answer a message in the middle of the night, do geos can holes that really should have continued drilling? Yeah. You need, and
Yeah,
you think about, like, that's a, kind of a bold, risk on his part too, right? Because
for
it's like
sure.
it could have easily just as in the morning been like, what the hell are you doing? You just wasted 50 feet of our drilling.
Yeah.
So
Well, it
that's
it it
that's
was again a very good learning experience, and it yes, it makes you question on all holes, is like, is now the time to cut it? That was one of the things that was very impressive about Midas, was that the alteration halo was quite tight, and
Mm.
you didn't have much indication that you're creeping up on a vein. And sometimes you'd
Yeah.
blow right through a vein. Here's a really good example. One of the other veins that we discovered was called the Homestead vein. That was about 1,500 feet into the hanging wall, and our first attempt at it, we lost it at 1,100 feet, and I was convinced there's another vein out there. And so, I hung my ass out there a little bit and just said, we are recollaring and we're spending however much, $50,000. We are drilling another hole.
Yeah.
And at 1,400, 1,500 feet, we popped into the vein. Oh, huge sigh of relief, but it was a nice big vein. But what was truly impressive is just like, okay, we're kind of at the threshold. We were kind of at the bottom of the mine, kind of at the farthest extent of what the underground rigs could handle uh, efficiently, if you will. So we're like, let's jump to
Yeah.
the surface. It makes a lot more sense. Hop to surface. We are right on section with the same hole. Our typical drill pattern was about 300-foot center. So we offset it by 300 feet and we drilled right over the top of it. And you could not, like, nothing. Like, maybe a crack, like maybe that was
Yeah.
it. You just could not tell. Again, the importance of being at that boiling horizon, like, you just could not tell that there was a vein at depth.
Yeah.
When we got the assays and the geochemistry back, I think there was a really subtle, like, arsenic and maybe mercury, selenium
But
kick.
by this
Like,
point, you would have seen hundreds of intercepts just like that were
yep,
nothing, right? And
yep,
so, yeah.
yep,
I remember I got a chance to go underground in an old. Actually, it's funny because Newmont owned it in the '50s, and I got to go underground in this mine, which hadn't been rehabbed since the '50s, so probably a questionable decision on my part. But they developed all along the boiling horizon underground, right? And then there's all these little small faults with like maybe 10 or 25 feet of offset. And they had like there's just ladders laid against basically the fault trace, and you'd climb up and then you'd go back into the boiling horizon, and then you'd get along, and then all of a sudden you'd hit a little small fault, and then it would drop back down. And I just remember going through this mine, looking at the walls, going, I would never see this structure in core. I would never see it. And so it just opened my eyes to how difficult such a simple concept as drilling along a boiling horizon can be, right?
well, it also, I mean, we drilled everything with core, and even in the core, you're like, maybe that crack. Think trying to doing exploration or drilling with an RC rig. You would blow through these things, and you
Oh yeah.
never would see them. Not a chance. Not a
Yeah.
chance. Later in my career, I worked at Fire Creek. That was one of the things that was so impressive there, is at the top of the Joyce vein. It was all RC drilling drilled over the top of the vein, and we mined when we mined that elevation and we mined through those RC holes, the RC holes did not speak to the high grade that we were it was just like RC holes just didn't see it, and
Yeah,
we mined through high grade. It was an education again in epithermal veins. I would say on most systems, you really don't want to drill RC because you miss so much, and
yep,
and
yep.
you can't just rely just on the assays. I don't know. Core's the way to go. A big advocate for it.
And it's so interesting because so many companies and so many projects, they wanna drill RC because it's cheap, right? And
Totally.
in those early holes, if you don't have diamond to understand, and don't get me wrong, I've worked in projects where I've been like, "All right, with this system, we should see the system if
Something.
it's good enough to mine with RC, and we need to save money and blah, blah, blah." But so much of the time, the diamond drilling is just it should just be like a everybody's gonna pony up the money and do diamond if you're drilling a new project in new areas that have never been drill tested, because the structural information you get, like even if you do televiewer data, nothing is a substitute for diamond drilling.
Yeah,
So
having that assay plus the context, yeah, it really is powerful for sure, for sure.
so at this point, I think you had drilled, was it 4 new veins? I can't remember, it's been a
It
few
was a whole
years.
set of them. I can't even remember how it ended up being like 6 or 8 when I was all said and done. I
Okay, yeah.
there were a bunch of them off to the east.
So what was your feeling during this? Like, did you feel like you were just like top of the world hitting these veins over and over again, or what was going on?
Very, well, it gave me a lot of confidence. Again, like I had this kooky brain hypothesis in my mind, this idea, and then to have it actually pan out gave me a lot of confidence. There were some nuances to the eastern veins compared to the main part of the district that so structurally they were there, but mineralogically and chemically they were very different. And so
Mm,
that got me thinking about, okay, why, right? And so that again got me thinking about, even bigger picture. And so initially it was just, structure, structure, structure. Well, it never really had dawned on me, well, okay, structures are faults, but really these faults are a basin. I need to understand the basin architecture. And within that basin architecture, the faults are different faults are active at different times. And it dawned on me is okay, the primary veins were on the main faults that were active the most part of the time. But as this basin is developing and it's subsiding towards the center, those veins are technically in the paragenesis, they're a bit younger. Therefore, the fluids were evolving and you were getting more silver dominated
mhm.
uh, veins versus the typical electrum that you would see in the main part of the vein. So the silver to gold ratio is, yeah, call it 12 to 1, 14 to 1 in the main part of the mine. But when we got out into the eastern veins, we were looking at 30 to 1 to 300 to 1.
Oh, wow.
So just the mineralogy changed and some of the accessory minerals also changed that caught our attention specifically in the main part of the district. It was always quartz calcite. Yeah, I'm sure there was adularia, but you can't really identify that. The eastern veins, fluorite, tons and tons of fluorite.
Oh,
And so
wow.
again, the evolution of this basin got us to thinking, well, it must be because again, these are the later fluids, they're more highly evolved, silver's a little bit more mobile, fluorine usually comes out of solution last. It was just like, okay, so this is making a lot of sense for this big basin, which then for the explorationist in me is like, well, we've only found one side of the basin. What's on the other
Mm,
side of the basin? We've never drill tested that. So again, that led to the next degree of exploration that we went, kind of in the mine, near mine. Now, hey, now we're out on surface and we're going to areas that we're extrapolating a lot further.
mm.
Which we chased those concepts for several years. I chased them during the Klondike days and then into the Hecla days. And again, the overarching architectural structural model is saying, hey, these things should be cymoidal in shape. Well, a cymoid kind of looks like a basin, so that also is just like, holy crap, that makes a lot of sense. And then these things pinch and swell. We should be able to check. There's not just going to be one basin; there should be other basins. And it was in the process of doing that mapping and sampling that we recognized a center way down to our southeast that was again on trend in echelon on trend, and we did some sampling This particular center was actually geyserite, and in the facies of sinter, sinter should never have gold mineralization in it. Geyserite is the only facies that can because you're right next to the vent. And sure enough, we were getting like a gram gold out of these
Oh,
geyserite. We're like, okay, this structure's definitely got to be mineralized. It's just now we got to figure out where the boiling horizon is. And quite literally, I think it was our first hole testing the Green Racer sinter target. We popped in and we hit a vein. It was just a little narrow guy, but it was at the tenth or 2/10 of a ounce per ton. Uh, uh, Enough to say, okay, their system. Now we just need to again keep chasing, and we just methodically chased it down dip, and then chased it along strike, and it just kept on growing.
I love the process of starting to come up with hypotheses and what you think you should see, and then how do we test it? And you start doing all of that, and you're like, okay, how do we map this, and how do we, how do we expand from where we're at now to try and understand larger pictures? And everybody has their own kind of unique workflow in this, but it's always just like leading closer and closer and closer to the answer. It feels like kind of like Wheel of Fortune, right? Where like the words like half spelled out, but it's not quite there. But you kind of all of a sudden know this is what I think it is, and then let's put some drill holes in here because you can never fully develop it, right? There's never the money, there's never the time to fully develop the hypothesis, and so it's like, at what point in the Wheel of Fortune are you comfortable guessing at what the word is?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits and um, yeah, I call it a benefit, I guess. I was associated with the property for about 18 years, but I was like working on the project for about 15, and so that's what I had the benefit of is all of that time to see all the logic, all of the success, all of the just how it evolved. Having that context, I think, also really helped with the successes that we have. Of course, I've taken that then since then and I've applied it to other districts, which have proven very fruitful as well. But it really was an education that it doesn't happen overnight.
Mhm.
But but like again to your point is it's really interesting to just see how it evolves, and you just learn bits and pieces of it, and then it all comes together. I mean, that's what's so gratifying about being a geologist is you're always in the hunt and you're observing and collecting this data, not knowing it necessarily if it means anything or not. And then when it all comes together, you're just like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. It's just fun. So what was the team that you worked with like? I mean, did the team dynamic play a part in how all of this kind of rolled out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the mine setting, when we were doing the eastern veins, at that time it was me and Randy Vance. Randy had a lot of knowledge in epithermal systems. I'm going to call him a graybeard, but at that time he certainly was not a graybeard. He was just older than I was. So he had a lot more experience, and so again, here's this young kid running around with all these crazy ideas, and it was as a man, him as a manager and all that knowledge, acting as really a mentor, just saying, reining you in a little bit and saying, or keep running with this. Kind of having that sounding board was really helpful.
Yeah.
So he was my most immediate boss with the Eastern veins, but then other people were also very important. The Rick Strifes, Brian Morris, he was there. He was very instrumental throughout my time at Midas. Mike Robinson, and then all my immediate colleagues. We just had an all around good team. There was never a lot of drama. I would say we would often do things socially outside of work as well as in work. Just a good bunch of guys. The geology, there was no, I wouldn't say there was a lot of, there were times that there was siloing, but for the most part, I would say that the departments work really well. The geology and engineering groups work really well to one another. If there's an issue, open door, walk across and had fruitful conversations. You were not,
Yeah.
you know, pounded down back in your hole. And same with operations. You had the ability to go walk and talk to the operations. Hey, I really need a muck bay here to do this. These are the reasons why. And they were, again, having the street credibility helped that. But it was just all around a good group of guys. It felt like family.
And you guys all shared an office there, right? So like it wasn't like you had to go to a different site to talk to somebody else in like, exploration or production or engineering.
Yeah, everything was one building. Geology basically had one common area where there was 3 or 4 desks. So the more junior people kind of sat in there, the kind of the bullpen area. But doors were open, and if something was happening in that area, you knew about it. I mean, it was very. It was good. It was not long hallways with offices stemming off of it or whatever. It was conducive to a lot of, water cooler talks, if you will.
Yeah. So tell me about the Farmers Brothers. Was the coffee enough to keep you guys going?
You know what? You do garner a taste for Farmers Brothers one way or the other. Of course, there are the coffee snobs that brought in their own coffee and had their own coffee pots, but yeah, I was a Farmer Brothers guy, and I probably drank way too much of it.
Yeah, I used to joke that it was like the floor sweepings from like the Starbucks, like grinding room or something. Maybe a sawmill next door as well. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
it had caffeine. That's what matters, right?
That's for sure. Well, so I mentioned the near term team. When we hit the Green Racer Center team, that was a very different team. That was actually several years later. So the Eastern Veins, those were discovered with Newmont about 2009. The Green Racer Center discovery, that would have been, I want to say maybe 2016, 2017, 2017, probably thereabouts. Uh, Very different dynamic there. That was a much smaller group. This is with Hecla by that time. I was managing all the exploration there, and I had a team of two, and we pushed just really really hard. Hey guys, this is an area. The paradigm was, hey, this is they called it the red rhyolite. Hey, it's red rhyolite. Why would you ever go map it? You're not going to see anything in there. Well, the structural model said there should be something out there, and it was pushing back on that paradigm that, and not that it was a long walk. I mean, it was, transects were maybe like 2 miles or something like that, but took the time to go out and actually map this stuff and walk over it. And the minute you walk over this stuff, you're just like, not only am I seeing crazy alteration, lots of, kaolinite and illite and alunite, like you're seeing all this clay alteration, and then you're popping into centers. It's just like, why hasn't anybody else seen this stuff? This is good stuff.
Yeah.
So the boots in the ground, critical. This is not stuff that you would have seen ever from air photographs or in the soils. You might have gotten some sniffs, but really the boots on the ground and seeing the small, and they were small because this was preserved at surface and buried to some degree. They were very small exposures, and if you didn't walk over those exposures, you never would have known it.
I think that that's one of the lessons I've learned a lot in my career is all the units where people say, "Oh, don't bother mapping over there." I'm almost always like, "All right, let's go do some transects," because I figure that's like maybe that's like all that's left is the places
Yeah.
that everybody else has dismissed as being terrible or not worth doing, and maybe you'll see something that gives you enough context to have an idea, right?
Yeah. The other place I would argue that you always need to drill, and I've been on properties, if there's a mill and it hasn't been drilled underneath the mill, drill underneath the mill.
Yeah, my personal theory is that they attract gold underneath mill and existing structures.
For sure.
And same with like heap leaches, any
Yeah.
infrastructure that's impossible to move, right?
That's right. It's
So I
funny.
guess what lessons have you taken from that series of discoveries really to the rest of your career since then?
Oh boy. I would say one takeaway is, and I was notorious for this, was bashing my predecessors. Like, well, why wouldn't my predecessor have done this, or why wouldn't my predecessor have done that? One thing that I've really come to appreciate is you don't necessarily know the circumstances that that individual was under, whether it was financial constraints or production constraints or team constraints. You don't necessarily know what those constraints are, so um, you got to be a little bit careful with poo pooing their predecessors. They were probably doing the best they could at the time, to some degree. And so, moving into other districts, you walk in, you're just like, well, why didn't they do this? And why didn't do that? And just being able to reflect, like one of the projects I'm currently working on, there is no surface drilling deeper than 450 feet. It's just like, but knowing that that was at the time in the 80s when everybody was drilling out there, that was the logic, is if you don't find stuff within the top, 500 feet, it's not worth drilling any deeper. So it's an opportunity for us, but um,
Yeah, it was a real constraint then.
it was a real constraint to them. Yeah. And again, I don't know if it was a constraint at the time, but clearly, it was. not well thought out, and I would say that it was
Yeah,
not necessarily geologically thought out. I think it was a business constraint rather than a geology constraint, and if and so, again, geologists having the ability to freely think and challenge paradigms, I think that's really important. I think that's really
yeah.
important. I'm working on a system, another system. It's a silver system. Well, why is it a silver system? 'Cause everybody says it's a silver system. Well, the last 20 years, you've only been assaying for silver, so yeah, it's going to be a silver system. If that's all you're assaying for. I, let's assay the other notes. Oh, look, lo and behold, there's gold and base metals. Totally. I
Huh.
mean, it's things like that that you just got to go back and really question and think about and consider when stepping into new projects.
I think that's a really good point, right? Because if you go about with the viewpoint of these people aren't stupid, they were just constrained. Let me understand what the constraints were so I can understand where the opportunities are. And
Yes.
that's a learning I wish I had had earlier in my career as well. You
Yeah.
know?
Uh, no, that's a very good way of saying it. That definitely is the case. Is if you can recognize the constraints that were in place, yeah, you definitely can recognize the opportunities a lot quicker. Yeah.
Yep. And then I guess what kind of final thoughts do you have on what your view of what made success at Midas was?
For me personally, I think it was dedication to the project, willing to stay there as long as I did, um, letting ideas foster. Um, for me, when I was first coming up with and I'm not the first person to come up with simoids, but simoids were discussed quite heavily and considered heavily in the 1940s and 1950s. When I was seeing all this stuff, I was like, I didn't have the words, and so I'm really thankful I spent the time to really dive into to the old literature and pull forward the concepts that had been previously thought about, but applying it to these things that I was seeing and trying to describe and trying to communicate. And I didn't have the words, and someone already had put the words together. So um, I feel very thankful, very blessed that I had the time that I had there. Midas was very special for me professionally. It was very great for my family as well. On the family side, we spent a lot of weekends out. Hey, I wanted to go see some outcrops. I took the kids out to see the outcrops on the weekends. So again, that dedication and that perseverance and that curiosity to maybe work those extra hours and blur the lines between work and family and work and recreation. I deer hunt out there all the time. I bird hunt out there all the time. Again, the ability to just walk over rocks in areas that I wouldn't necessarily have had the chance to do during work. Spending more time with boots on the ground, the better you are, because again, you just get the context and but it's time, and the most precious thing we have is time. So if there's
Yep.
a way that you can accelerate that, which uh, the bigger and the better the team you have, those are the things that you certainly can accelerate. But having one person to uh, foster or be able to pull all that information together, I think was very beneficial for Midas.
No, that's great, and I think it's kind of interesting. I've got 5 kids, right? And I've thought a lot about the passion. All the good explorers I know, they want to be out there hiking around, walking, and doing stuff. And so having that balance of saying, "Hey, do you kids want to go hunting? Do you want to go hiking? Do you want to go rock hounding?" You still get to spend time with your kids and explore your passion, and then also show your kids that passion, which I think has its own unique thing. I have no idea if any of my kids will become geos or anything else, but I know that they'll learn from that. Maybe they'll learn what not to do, but they'll learn from it.
For sure, for sure. And honestly, I just appreciate that time in the field. I mean, being away from the house and away from the TV and all those distractions, being in a remote area in Nevada, you're not getting cell reception necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It's I treasure those moments with the kids for sure.
I guess one final question: what advice do you have for a new geo starting out just now, like kind of how you were in 2002, 2003?
Boy, oh boy, how things have changed. Here we're all time highs for gold and silver. Um, Things have just changed so much. The junior sector is a difficult place to work in right now. The majors are doing layoffs. Boy, what advice do I have? Um, for those that are really interested in economic geology and passionate about this field, um, keep the faith. You just got to keep pushing. It's rewarding. It really is when you can press through, but at the same time, I fully recognize having moved my family around, started a family, had a family, raised a family in Nevada, in rural Nevada. There's a lot of sacrifices that the family makes for the profession, and you know, I would say come into this profession knowing that I have a family. It's gonna be tough, but if the passion is there, anything is possible. It's a very interesting time. I wish more geos were coming into this field, and I wish industry was more welcoming.
Yeah. Yep. And I think I was reflecting on what you said earlier with John Muntean and some of the other folks. I guess like that's a big burden on all the geos out there, like yourself and myself as well, is make time to talk to these young geos, right? So if you're listening to this show, make time to talk to some young geo because you might make the difference in their career that they need. So
For sure, and I would encourage that those young geos to get out of that comfort zone and go approach people and just try and have a conversation. Who are you? What do you do? And you know, express that enthusiasm, express that passion that you really want to do this. It's a two-way street, but yeah, for the older geos, take a minute and get to know somebody for sure.
Digging deep where the stories hide, through the hills and the mountains wide. Pickaxe swing and the earth unfolds, chasing dreams in the dirt and gold. Geology calling under our feet, secrets are buried in the rock and heat. With a heart full of wonder and a map in hand, exploring the treasures of this great land.